Right, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon. All right, so I have been given a task to do some quiz with all of you. Yeah, a brain game to everyone with Slido. So please join me while you are listening to my presentation. And these are the topics that we are going to cover: to recognize global Ramadan eating pattern, as well as how to apply the RNP guide, especially with regard to calories and carbohydrate. All right, so please join me to the quiz. I have Dr. Sue on board while we are pre-testing just now. Okay, and for the prize, you can claim to perhaps Dr. Hassani. Yeah? Trip to Malaysia, Dr. Zanaria said. Okay. Right. So, and of course, those at virtual, please join us as well. Okay. So maybe allow me to start while you are scanned. Okay. This is the first question. How does dietary quality in Ramadan change in your patient? Better, get worse, no change, or not sure? Okay, 70% of all of us attending this conference said that the dietary quality of the patient during Ramadan getting worsened. Yeah, so this is correct, especially when we look at into dietary quality change in Ramadan. As you can see in the slide, there are major differences in dietary intake between Ramadan versus the rest of the year, where a lot of patients consume more refined carbohydrate and sweets. For example, in Lebanon, the consumption of sweet, pastry, sugar-sweetened beverages has been increased tremendously during Ramadan, whereas other food products such as cereal, milk, and dairy products, nuts and seeds, which is we know from the good dietary quality, has been dropped throughout the Ramadan. And in India, indeed, we see that they are become more sedentary, and they actually increase their weight at the end of Ramadan due to the change in dietary intake. How about those people living with diabetes? From my experience observing their dietary intake, we understood now a lot of patients actually increase sugar consumption. So when I did some intervention, the reduction is only about 75% from 79% to show that we have to do a lot more work. And they eat around 38% eat carbohydrate within the guidelines, so to show that many more actually eat a huge amount of carbohydrate and become very sedentary during Ramadan. Right. And this is very nice study to show that the global dietary pattern with regard to Ramadan across various country and region. So you can see those in green is actually highlighted low GI food-based product. And you can see, for example, in Southeast Asia, representing by Singapore, there is none of the food product come from low GI properties, to show that a lot of carbohydrate basically predominant throughout the Ramadan dietary intake pattern, and this is mainly come from high GI food product, and low GI food rarely exceed 20 to 40% of the consumption, and what we observe that it is none in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so this is how to visualize all the food product during Ramadan. Right, now get ready for the second quiz. Okay, everyone ready? Okay, so your patient always consume a deep fried starter, and if they refuse to give them up, what is the most effective RNP guided improvement? Fry them in olive oil, eat them at sahur instead of iftar, swap to different cooking method, or drink hot tea to melt the fat. Is that true? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So they are also said that drink hot tea. So that's a risk basically. So we have to actually swap to better cooking method. Yeah, if you remember, Dr. Peter mentioned in the early presentation how corporate it is, fried carbohydrate food. Yeah, and we must pair with something protein-based or fiber. So, as we know, eating fried carbs alone will induce rapid and prolonged glucose rise. We know now that different nutrients have different impact to blood glucose. Yeah, and therefore pairing them with protein and fiber would buffer the glycemic impact. So the role of soluble fiber and protein in the soup, for example, would slow down the gastric emptying, and modifying cooking method to minimal the fat intake would actually improve the post-meal insulin efficiency. So this is some of the example that we can actually advise to the patient, so they don't have to sacrifice, but what do they need to do is to modify and pairing them with appropriate nutrient. Yep. And in this case, is protein and fiber. Right. Now get ready for another quiz. All right. Okay, everyone ready? Which Ramadan meal period do you think poses the highest glycemic challenge? Sahur, iftar, or both of them, or night snack, or all time? Okay, right. So almost majority said iftar, but from my observation throughout a lot of research, we found that basically, especially in Southeast Asia, this is the data from Indonesia, this is the data from Malaysia, you can see that post-sahur and post-iftar are equally produce high in postprandial blood glucose level. So which means that we have significant glycemic excursion for both sahur and iftar. So high post-iftar stay longer throughout, whereas high post-sahur, there is a tendency to drop potentially at mid-morning low. Yeah, and this is also a data among type 1 diabetes in Saudi Arabia. So you can see it's not only about iftar, but we have now dual problem that we have to manage with regard to food intake. All right, now get ready for another two last question. Okay, so this is about the mid-morning crash or reactive hypoglycemia. So I'm asking about what are the causes and how to fix them. Yeah, he take about 6 to 7 slices of wholemeal bread, which is generally low GI, and eat them with black coffee. So the answer would be right. Yes, the cause because of, although it is come from the low GI properties, but again, the amount of carbohydrate still need to be controlled. Yeah, and then of course, when we pair them with fiber and protein, it will give a better glycemic control. Right. Okay, so this is how does it looks like. Yeah, the combination of too much carb with no other nutrient will absolutely increase the risk of hyperglycemia right after sahur, and they will have mid-morning crash due to reactive hypoglycemia. And therefore, we suggest to build a crash-proof sahur, prioritizing protein for satiety. So don't allow your patient just to take 2 slices of wholemeal bread. Mix them together with other nutrients, especially protein and fiber. Yeah, that will help to stabilize blood glucose and give them more sustainable energy pattern. All right, well done. We have one last question before this. So to my Malaysian patient especially, I always teach them to mix and match. It is a good pairing strategy, especially at sahur, because usually sahur in Southeast Asia, the carbohydrate loading is highly predominant. Yeah. Okay, now we know that the data confirm type 2 diabetes patients typically increase their calorie and carbohydrate intake during Ramadan. If I see this graph, for example, you know that iftar, there are patients who eat at one meal more than 1,500 calories. So imagine that it's like a one big calorie intake for a day, only for single meal time. And in this study, they look at into the energy intake, average increased by 4% and carbohydrate by 13%. We also observe in our usual care group in our study that carbohydrate increased to 5% during Ramadan. So the question is, get ready everyone for the last one. Yeah, to improve blood glucose level, how much carbohydrate are recommended on the RNP plate? 50%, half of the plate, 25%, or no carbs at all, or unlimited as long as it comes from the brown rice. So which one? All right. So the answer would be quarter of the plate. Yeah, well done everyone. Although there are some who need to stay throughout the conference, you can go back, yeah, for those answering half of the plate. Right. So let's look at into who are the winner. Wow, Nabila, who are you? Wow, congratulations. Please meet Dr. Hassanin after this. And Dr. Khatija. All right. Thank you very much for participating. All right. Okay. All right. So generally, this is the plate that we have developed. So it is actually provide about 500 to 800 calorie. With quarter of it is carbohydrate, and it must come from the low GI properties. Yeah. And it's also important to note that in our RNP guideline, we have distributed the calories equally. Yeah. So not every of the calorie focusing on iftar, it should be distributed evenly through sahur, iftar, and snack. Studies have shown among those people with type 2 diabetes, only eating one meal per day would increase their risk of hypoglycemia significantly throughout the Ramadan. And not to forget that sufficient hydration, we heard a lot about cardiovascular management, as well as if dates taken into consideration, it must be counted as part of the carbohydrate management. And other strategies to minimize post-meal glucose at iftar include meal sequencing, eat your carb last, yeah? Prioritize protein and vegetable as a focus, and make sure that the meal are overloaded with low GI, fiber-rich, and whole grain. So as a summary, the problem is clear. We have a common glycemic challenge in Ramadan. Dietary quality are declining with refined carbohydrate, and meals are generally overloaded with high GI carbohydrate. And we now know that there are two predictable glucose events occur daily throughout Ramadan, not only iftar, but it also includes sahur. So it is very important to make sure that our patients have planned a proper pair food with protein and fiber as for sahur, as well as to teach them to sequence their meal with carbohydrate later throughout iftar. With that, I would like to invite everyone again to Malaysia. Yeah, you can come virtually, and thank you for your kind attention.